Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What is up? How's it going, Rohan?
What's up, guys? I'm good. How are you, Marco?
Doing great, man. Just stressful couple days, car broke down completely and then had to go handle that stuff, man. Stressful couple days, but 49ers football is always what brings me back to life as well as, just chit-chatting with you, man. How you been?
I've been good. Yeah. Crazy couple of days, not only personal wise, but NFL news wise. And let's get right into it. So, last week we were talking on Friday. We had Jordan Tucker come on. It was a great pod. For those of you guys who didn't check it out, be sure to check out last weekend's pod. We talked with Jordan Tucker, UNC offensive tackle. Great interview, great guy, should do well in the NFL. But over the last week, we've had a lot of NFL news. Let's talk about the first move, and that was Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. Aaron Rodgers saying, I'm staying in Green Bay. Russell Wilson moved to Denver. What were your initial thoughts?
I was not shocked that Aaron Rodgers was staying in Green Bay. I mean, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be one of those dudes who plays with that one team his entire career. I didn't see him being traded for any reason. The only reason is because, like, when Aaron Rodgers is getting all this stuff, he's complaining to the Packers that he wants more say in the team, right? It's like, and then all of a sudden he starts getting a little bit more say. So why would he leave a situation where now he has complete control of that team, right? So any moment, if he really wants to say, "Hey, trade me," all he has to do is go to the media and say, "Hey, I want to be traded." Especially after the draft, right? I mean, in the first round, if they don't go receiver, if they don't go a weapon that he could use this year, um, then he's probably going to request a trade. Then I would see something like that. But he came out and said he did not sign a $200 million contract extension. So if that's exactly what he said, he didn't sign that yet. They are working on a new deal. That's what he said. It's just interesting how the Packers played it out, right? Like they thought he was going to ask for a trade. So they've been kind of eyeballing Jordan Love as their future. They've been looking other routes, but I thought it was interesting how Aaron Rodgers stayed there like I had thought he would.
Yeah, I thought it was certainly interesting too, because I thought, I think you were in the same boat, but I thought that both Rodgers, Wilson, I think both of those, I personally thought that they were going to stay with their respective teams for 2022. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Russell Wilson did get moved. We both thought the main guy that was going to get moved was Deshaun Watson, who's currently being swirled in rumors after he was found cleared of all criminal charges yesterday. But speaking on Russell Wilson, he's going to the Denver Broncos up in that AFC West. Now he's out of the NFC. The 49ers kryptonite essentially over the last couple of seasons. He's had a fairly strong record against the 49ers. And so do you think the Seahawks now are in play for a quarterback, or do you think they're going to move forward and stick with their current picks and look to draft a quarterback in the future either this year or next year?
So what I really do think the Seahawks are doing, I think they're in a full rebuild mood. I don't think Deshaun Watson goes there. He won't sign his no trade clause. Absolutely ridiculous if he was to go there, especially with the roster they have. They do have weapons on offense. They do have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. They have a decent run game. So I mean, he could make some noise with those receivers. But that offensive line isn't great. The reason why Russell Wilson wanted to leave, he kept saying upgrade my offensive line, and they kept saying no. Their defense is not good at all. Their best player on defense was Bobby Wagner. He gets released, very random release. So now their best player on defense is Jamal Adams. I do not see Deshaun Watson accepting a trade to the Seattle Seahawks unless he just wants to play with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I'd be very shocked. What I think they end up doing, I think they take Malik Willis at 9. Realistically, if the Panthers end up getting Deshaun Watson, like I think they will, Malik Willis, Matt Corral will be there at 9 unless the team jumps up into the top 10, which I think would be stupid if they did. I mean, realistically, with the quarterback class, that'd be kind of dumb to trade up. So I think Seattle takes Malik Willis at 9. He fits what they want to do. He has athletic arm. He's athletic. DK Metcalf would benefit from him because he has a rocket arm. Tyler Lockett would benefit from his um, mobility of scrambling and creating that extra few seconds for Tyler Lockett to get open. He's great at that um, backyard football stuff, so he would definitely benefit from that. But then the reason why I think you do this is because not only do you look at next year, so you get to see what Malik Willis is for 1 year, right? And if he shows flashes, if he shows great ability, then you continue drafting and building around this kid. If not, what you do is you kind of do the Arizona Cardinals approach, right? They take Josh Rosen in the first round. They say Josh Rosen is their guy, and then at number one, you end up having a guy like Kyler Murray. You end up taking the first overall pick, a great quarterback Kyler Murray is. So I think the Seattle Seahawks could take that approach, right? You take Malik Willis. You're most likely going to be one of the worst teams in football because you just lost a great quarterback. I mean, they should still win some games with the weapons they have on offense, the defensive style approach that they're going to take. So they are going to win some games, and I think they are going to win about 6 games. But then they just got a lot of picks for Russell Wilson. Bryce Young will be the number one overall pick next year. There are a lot of other QB options next year's draft class. What they could do is trade all those picks they just got for Russell Wilson plus more if they really, really feel like Bryce Young is that guy, plus Malik Willis. Because remember, teams probably like Malik Willis. So if you end up doing all of that, you give all those picks to a team plus Malik Willis. Now they're satisfied. They could go out and they have their young quarterback to build around in Malik Willis. So I think that's what's going to end up be happening. I think Seattle's going to take Malik Willis if he's there, and then eventually they'll end up looking at Bryce Young in next year's draft, which is going to piss me off as a 49ers fan because Bryce Young
Yeah.
is the real deal.
And I agree. I don't think that Seattle is necessarily in the race. And here's why. Seattle is already on the books for $26 million in dead cap at the quarterback position because Russell Wilson, just trading doesn't mean, guess what, you get his entire salary off. No, Seattle is actually on the books for $26 million already in dead cap. And yes, they do have cap space. They have around 45 million or so in cap space, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to spend another 35 million toward the quarterback position in 2022 just to be the fourth team in the division. Because when you look at it, the Seattle offensive line right now is really, really bad. And I'm not saying that it's been bad, maybe as bad as Russell Wilson said over the duration of the last 10 years. But guess what? The best player on that Seattle offensive line was left tackle Dwayne Brown. He didn't get an extension last year, and so he's a free agent right now. And I don't think he's going back to Seattle. I think he'll probably go to a team similar to the Indianapolis Colts who might want to replace a guy like Eric Fisher. But in addition, not only is Seattle's offensive line bad, they have a lot of good free agents that are on the market. They just released Bobby Wagner, a clear indication of where they're heading as a franchise. Because if you're going to compete in 2022, you're keeping your team captain in Bobby Wagner. And that's why I think there's no reason for the Seattle Seahawks to be interested in either Deshaun Watson or even potentially Kirk Cousins, because you're only increasing your cap space or you're only increasing your payroll for 2022 at the quarterback position. You're already at such a burden. And a lot of key players like a Quandre Diggs, who you likely want to bring back, you might not be able to bring them back because you're using so much cap space to fill up that quarterback role. Instead, you could take a quarterback at pick 9, or even so, you might not even take a quarterback at pick 9. Sign a guy like Marcus Mariota, sign a guy like Trubisky, sign whoever it is, a bridge quarterback to compete with Drew Lock for the starting job in 2021, and then take a good skill position player and build for the roster in 2022 when you're likely drafting the quarterback of your future because you have a good amount of assets. And even if you don't get that number one overall pick, like you said, Marco, they have a ton of assets now from that Russell Wilson trade if they want to potentially make a super package to move up and select a guy like Bryce Young at number one overall.
Yeah, essentially they could end up trading. For example, they could trade because they have Broncos, Denver's next year's first, which might be in the 20s range, whatever, 20, 30 range, depending on how far they get into the playoffs. If they make the playoffs, because they're in a deep, deep AFC West. So
Yeah,
they have to battle that out to get to the playoffs, which I think they should make the playoffs with the roster they have and adding a quarterback like Russell Wilson. But then
right.
they could end up trading next year Broncos first. I still think I think Seattle gets their first back next year from the Jamal Adams trade, I believe.
Yeah, they do. This was
They
the
do. So
last year for
that's
that.
they could trade essentially they could trade 3 first round picks, um, and get to number 1 or even 4 and they would only be 3 plus the Broncos pick. So technically, that's just like it's replacing your quarterback for a bunch of draft capital and getting a little bit younger at quarterback. It sounded like Russell Wilson wasn't gonna. His plans wasn't to stay there for the rest of his career. He's been wanting to leave for some time. At least what it sounded like from kind of what Russell Wilson kind of said. Um, so I'm happy Russell Wilson's in. We still have to play him this year though,
Mhm.
because we do play the AFC West, which is a hell of a division. Um, but also there was other news that happened, right? So the Commanders end up trading Wentz,
Yeah.
which was an interesting trade because they take the full salary from Carson Wentz, which is I believe 25 million roughly. That was a number, it might be off, but they end up taking that on. They give some good enough draft capital, more than I thought Carson Wentz would have netted. So now that's another team off the market for a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. What do you think about the Carson? Because Russell Wilson, and Denver Broncos, they had nothing to do with Jimmy Garoppolo. People were like, "Oh,
Mhm.
that's another." The Denver Broncos are never, ever,
Yeah,
ever,
exactly.
ever looking at Jimmy Garoppolo as a starter, as a replacement for Teddy Bridgewater or Drew Lock. That was
Mhm.
not the case. They were looking at Watson, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson. Those are the 3 quarterbacks
Yeah.
they were looking at. If they struck out then they were going to turn that number 9 pick into a quarterback in the draft like Malik Willis or Matt Corral. They were never looking at Jimmy Garoppolo for quarterback, just to clear things up for most Niner fans.
Yep. And the way that I thought about it after the Wilson trade went down, I said this is a good thing for San Francisco because it took like I know we never expect a guy like Russell Wilson potentially to be moved to a team like the Colts. Like it's like a dark horse type of candidate. But if we think about it, the Denver Broncos were never in the mix for Jimmy Garoppolo. The teams in the mix potentially would be the Colts, the Steelers, the Commanders were in it before they traded for Wentz, and then a dark horse team would be the Carolina Panthers. Those are honestly the only 4 teams that potentially are in the mix for Jimmy Garoppolo. And so taking Russell Wilson out of one of those 4 hands and having him go to the Denver Broncos in this trade, that's a good thing for the 49ers because not only does it you see the compensation that Russell Wilson got in return for that trade, you also send him outside to the AFC. So it's also not in the same conference as the 49ers, but it's also not to a team that was expected to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. And then we see the Carson Wentz deal happen for 2/3, which one could go to a conditional second. Yeah, did that take one market off of Jimmy Garoppolo trade? Yes. But what I've heard was Jimmy Garoppolo was not going to waive his no trade clause to go to Washington. And so Washington likely didn't want to wait for Jimmy Garoppolo or for the 49ers to go against Jimmy Garoppolo's wishes and trade him after the March 16th when the new league year starts and Garoppolo's no trade clause hits, which is why they didn't want to wait is what like Schefter tweeted that they didn't want to wait for Garoppolo and hence why they pulled the trigger so quickly for Wentz. So you could see the aggression from Washington. They were looking for a quarterback. They threw 3 1s for Russell Wilson. They didn't acquire him because he was still in the conference. Seattle wanted him out, and so then they go ahead and get Wentz. And now you kind of look at that Wentz deal. Like essentially, it's a 2 and a 3 because I think Wentz plays more than 70% of the snaps. That's kind of like the baseline now for a Garoppolo deal because uh, arguably Wentz, like if the Colts trade for Garoppolo, it's because they like his character. Arguably, you can argue whether Wentz or Garoppolo is the better quarterback, but it's clear which one has the better intangibles. And while they may not seem as eye popping to the like to NFL fans like us, it is eye popping to NFL franchises. And that's what people like Jordan Elliott and people like Nate Atkins, the Colts indie beat reporter, was hearing at the combine that these intangibles are important. And that's why I think that's the baseline for a trade of like for Jimmy Garoppolo.
And I agree. I think that's what's going to end up happening. So I do think I thought Jimmy Garoppolo would be a Commander. That's the team that I kept thinking that's realistically that's where the Martin Mayhew, the connections there. I thought they would end up doing that. The thing is was Jimmy Garoppolo really going to waive his no trade clause for the Commanders? And I think that it would put him in a situation where he would have to carry the team a little bit more, if that makes sense. And I think what
Mhm.
Jimmy Garoppolo understands is he has one more opportunity to show that he's an NFL franchise quarterback, and this is his
Right.
last opportunity to show it. So Antonio Gibson is not a bow cow running back. They don't have a running back who can carry the load or a run game where they could rely on their defense and their running game. So I think
Right.
that the most realistic spots were the Steelers and the Commanders, because I thought the Commanders would go get that guy, even they would go offer enough. Jimmy Garoppolo would end up saying, you know what? Yeah, they want me enough. Let me go ahead and get an extension with them while I'm at it.
Hmm.
But if you look at the teams available, we have the Colts, we have Steelers. A lot of people think the Panthers. I don't think the Panthers are in Jimmy Garoppolo at all. I don't think they're even a dark horse. I think they're in Deshaun Watson or nothing. That's their mentality. Especially when we hear their owner publicly stating that they must get a quarterback. You must get a quarterback. That's not Jimmy Garoppolo. You want a franchise quarterback. That's not Jimmy. Let's be realistic. Let's be honest. It's not Jimmy. And that's not me saying Jimmy isn't a franchise caliber guy, but when your owner is pressuring the general manager and the head coach to go get a guy, he's literally saying, I'm giving you all options to go get Deshaun Watson after he was cleared, right? So they're going to end up trading outrageous amount of picks. I see 3 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson plus a few players. It's going to end up being a little bit more than what Russell Wilson went for, and that's because Deshaun Watson's younger. We have to remember
Yeah.
the age difference. You get him for a lot longer.
And Sean Watson's better too.
I agree, absolutely agree. So I think Jim. It comes down to Indianapolis Colts and the Steelers, unless everyone keeps throwing the Panthers as a dark horse. Unless something happens with Derek Carr, I could see
Mm.
Josh McDaniels giving Jimmy G a shot for a pick. And then it would be, remember, it's only a 1-year deal, but I think Derek Carr is locked and set stone as a Raider. I think they're going to
Yeah,
eventually
I agree.
extend him. I think that's a good fit. Derek Carr and McDaniels is a very good fit. Um, I do think the Colts are going to end up making a move on Jimmy. I don't think they're going to make a move on anyone else realistically.
Yeah, and breaking it down, like quickly on the Panthers, the reason I tab them as a dark horse is for like similar to what you're saying. Owner did say we got to go out and get a quarterback. I agree. But Matt Rule, he's on the hot seat in my opinion. He's had 2 subpar years where they've had 2 fairly like they haven't had good roster construction over the last 2 years. They've been just going everywhere and anywhere at the quarterback position. They had Teddy Bridgewater, which obviously didn't work out. Then they traded for Sam Darnold, traded a second, a fourth, and a sixth. That didn't work out. But they had the whole issue where they were benching Sam Darnold for PJ Walker. Then they replaced him back in the starting lineup. Then they end up signing Cam Newton. And, they have a barrage of 3 quarterbacks where I think the most important thing right now is a stable option that can get you, that can win you games when you need to. And I don't think Garoppolo obviously can win you games all the time, but I think he is one of the more consistent quarterbacks available on the market right now, apart from Deshaun Watson. So I do think that the Deshaun Watson trade, I think it's likely happening to Carolina. There really aren't that many contenders outside of Carolina at this moment. I think Aaron Wilson recently reported that the Philadelphia Eagles are out of the mix. That was like the other team that I thought were going to be the main front-running contenders. They're out of the mix. So guess what? It's Carolina, Seattle, which is pretty much out of the mix for me. Then Tampa Bay, I think, is the only dark horse because he'd flourish in that type of system. But I don't think they have nearly the amount of assets that Carolina does, which is why I do think he ends up in Carolina. But for some reason, if Carolina can't get Watson, the reason I do think that they could be a dark horse is because right now they don't have a quarterback for 2022. And on the free agent market, they've tried it too many times and it's just consistently failed them with Bridgewater and now Newton. I do think that they could look to try and at least inquire about Garoppolo, which could push his price up at the very last hour. But at this point, it does seem very realistic that they're going to get Deshaun Watson.
See, but then if Carolina wants to look at the free agent market, right, you have to put into consideration how much better is Jimmy Garoppolo than Marcus Mariota and Mitchell Trubisky, right? But at the same time, like you just mentioned, Matt Rule is on the hot seat with Carolina. So that plays a big factor in getting a quarterback in free agency that isn't a starting quarterback, right? If Mariota and Mitchell Trubisky weren't good enough to be starters last year in the NFL, how good are they realistically to be a starter on your team? So the reason why I think they're all in on Deshaun Watson is the owner's pressuring them. He understands that his coach only has a year to prove himself. If he gives him a quarterback, he's supposed to be this offensive genius. Let him prove himself with Deshaun Watson. If he does, you have your head coach. If not, Deshaun Watson gives you the best opportunity to hire the best coaching
Yeah,
candidate on the market. And that's
100%.
hands down, it does. I mean, Deshaun Watson is one of those top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL when he is playing and not in having to do with legal issues or whatever the case may be. He is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. So I think that's why the owner's pressuring him, because he understands if Rule's out, at least he could get a head coach who is a great head coach eventually. A guy like, who knows, Eric Bieniemy might end up as a Panther. The stuff like that he has
Right.
to weigh and everything. So that's why I think Carolina is all in on Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, that's why I slot him there. So now we have Pittsburgh sitting at 20. They're not going to get a
They're
quarterback
not
at
going
20.
quarterback. Yeah.
Um, if anything, they'll look at a guy like Marcus Mariota to be a quarterback they could work with. It would be a little bit upgrade of Big Ben, because Big Ben struggled to throw downfield, struggled to
Right.
do what he used to do. So a little bit upgrade over Big Ben at that point in his career. Even though Big Ben is a Hall of Famer, at that point of his career, his arm was shot. Um, Talking about Jimmy Garoppolo, we're at that we keep talking about it, right? Where does Jimmy Garoppolo end up? At the end of the day, everyone keeps, and this is something that I kind of bugs me with 49er fans, um, because everyone keeps saying, so for example, if Jimmy Garoppolo isn't traded by the start of the new league year, it is a red flag on Trey Lance, or it shows that Trey Lance is not ready. This isn't, no, it does not say that. We have to realize Jimmy Garoppolo has a no trade clause, right? So what does this mean? So Jimmy Garoppolo at this point, if he gets traded, or if a team um, goes to offer something, Jimmy Garoppolo has to approve of the trade. He has to say, yes, I
Right.
will go there until the start of the new league year. So the reason why I think it's not a red flag on Trey Lance is because if the 49ers come Tuesday, I believe that the new is on Tuesday. If it comes March
Mhm.
16th and Jimmy Garoppolo is the quarterback of the 49ers, they have an opportunity to trade him without him having to accept any trade he goes to. So it could
Right.
a clear transition. You give me the best draft capital, he's your quarterback, kind of thing. It doesn't mean Trey Lance isn't ready. What it means is the 49ers could be holding out to get the most capital if they know Jimmy Garoppolo will decline a trade to the Steelers or to the Colts. Because at the end of the day, what Jimmy G could do right now, and realistically what he could do, if the 49ers came out and said, Jimmy Garoppolo, you have been traded to the Indianapolis Colts, blah, blah,
He
blah,
could
pack
say
your bags,
no.
whatever, he could be like, I'm not going. And then now that gets the Colts to back out of it, and then the Colts could go jet and they could make a trade to another quarterback, and then it loses things, right? The same thing with the
Right.
Steelers. You lose a trade partner if you do that right now. But if it comes the day of the new league year, the Colts offer a second rounder. You take it. Jimmy Garoppolo cannot have any say, even though the 49ers want to do right by him. Sending him to the Colts is doing right by him, because you're not sending him to a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars. You're not, even though the Jags have a quarterback, I'm saying, like, franchise wise, you're not sending them to a bottom feeder team without a good general manager and without a good head coach. That's a good team defensively, run game. They have a decent weapons. You're sending him to a good situation, so you do right by him at the end of the day. So I think what the 49ers are doing by holding on to him is smart, by allowing them all avenues to make a trade partner the day the new league year starts. They can make that trade, announce it that day. I think Jimmy Garoppolo ends up being traded for more than people think, and I think he is gonna be a Colt. First, I really thought it was gonna be the Steelers, but it doesn't sound like the Steelers um, want to make a move at quarterback through trade. If anything, they want to address it in free agency. And I think with how bad of a draft class at quarterback it is, they could end up getting a quarterback at 20. For example, if Deshaun Watson goes at 6 to the Panthers, traded Panthers, end up giving up pick overall 6, Deshaun Watson's off the board. So at number 6, the Texans aren't taking a quarterback. At number 9, Seattle might take Malik Willis. They might take Matt Corral. But then if you keep
Right.
looking at the entire draft, like from 9 to 20, no quarterback should be taking a no team should be taking a quarterback within that spot. So I think the Steelers are in a perfect situation to draft a quarterback and sign a free agent, let them battle it out for the first year, and then transition to your rookie quarterback or have your rookie quarterback take over now. So I think Jimmy Garoppolo will be traded to the Indianapolis Colts. I do not think it is a red flag that they have not moved him yet.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I just read a tweet that it is a red flag, and I agree with you. I don't think it's a red flag, and there are multiple reasons. First of all, if we're talking specifically about the Colts, Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay, the two main guys in the brass of the Indianapolis Colts, are high on character. If you have a quarterback that says, I don't want to play there, that is an immediate red flag, and the 49ers are giving Jimmy Garoppolo the opportunity to do that if you move him without his consent before his no trade clause expires. But honestly, I think the main thing, the main caveat right now is Jimmy Garoppolo and Don Yee, his agent, are likely talking with teams in trying to get a potential extension in the works because Jimmy Garoppolo wants that guaranteed money. Currently, his deal does not have guaranteed money. It's only 1.695 million in guaranteed money, or 1 point something like that in guaranteed money for this year. So he's likely looking for an extension so that he has a guarantee for the next 1 to 2 years that not only, like, if he's not even the starter, at least he's getting paid the money that he's looking for. So likely, a team also could look to extend Jimmy Garoppolo to remove that 27 point or whatever million cap hit this year, push some of the money to next year so that you have an ability, especially the Colts, you have an ability to go in free agency and operate as if you're pushing for this year. Because if you look at the Colts right now, this is their year to compete. I don't believe the rumors that they're going to target a guy like Trubisky for the sole reason that if you look at their cap space, they right now are in the prime position. Darius Leonard's contract increases next year about $8 million in terms of cap hit. Braden Smith, the right tackle that they signed, his contract, or I think it's either Smith or Kelly, one of the two, their contract also significantly increases next year. Darius Leonard, his contract increases next year. And then on top of that, you have to pay Quentin Nelson next year, who's a free agent next year because he was in or his 5th-year deal, I believe, is this year. So you're going to have to pay him as well next year. And there are a lot of cap things that they're going to have to deal with next year. And I know the cap is going to increase, but there's a lot of uncertainties. So if you can get a guy quarterback this year right now with that 70 million in cap space and then even negotiate an extension, guess what? You're around 50 million in cap space, which is one of the highest for teams. You're also a competitor, and there are a lot of veterans on this board. There's a lot of veterans in this free agency class that are probably looking to get to be in contention for a ring, and that's what entices you for the Indianapolis Colts. Also, for suitors for Garoppolo, the tampering period starts March 14th, and so you likely want to go into free agency talking to free agents with the idea of who's going to be your starting quarterback, because it's not a great look if you have Sam Ehlinger as the only quarterback on your roster like that, and going into free agency thinking Sam Ehlinger is the quarterback. That's not as enticing as Jimmy Garoppolo as the starter for your team, especially given the notion of how much Jimmy Garoppolo is loved by his teammates. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure on where Garoppolo ends up. My belief is still the Colts. It kind of has been since the Carson Wentz trade went down. But I do think that it's certainly not a Trey Lance flag. I do think that 49ers are definitely methodically playing it. And we know that the 49ers also have a contingency, or like a inclination always to try and get as much as possible. So they're probably trying to look to squeeze as much as possible from this deal before it actually goes down. Hopefully it doesn't backfire on them. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the Garoppolo deal and how like other teams might be approaching it, but also how the 49ers might be approaching it alongside Garoppolo's camp.
And the thing is with the Colts too, is if they extend him and they lower that cap hit, so they don't have a draft pick, a first rounder this year that's high or whatever. They think they sent it away. I don't even think they have one. I have to double check real quick. Draft picks, because I like to. I believe they have a first rounder. Could be wrong. But the reason why I think he ends up with the Colts isn't because of their draft capital, what they could trade away from him. So the reason why is when we look at the Colts and we see what they could do. You just talked about how this is their year where they have all this draft capital, the cap space, and they could put a lot in free agency, and they could surround Jimmy Garoppolo with what he needs for the next couple of years. If you lower his cap hits and you give him more guaranteed money over the next couple of years, it's more enticing for Jimmy Garoppolo because he doesn't have to worry about what the Indianapolis Colts are going to end up doing down the road. if they don't have a high draft pick, then you don't have to worry about a Trey Lance situation that ends up happening with Jimmy Garoppolo this year. So I believe the Colts don't have a first because of the Carson Wentz trade. It was a second rounder that was a second round, a conditional second rounder that elevated to a first. So they don't have a first
Right.
rounder this year. They picked up the Commanders second this year. Um,
Mhm.
Going into 2023, they have a first rounder, but realistically, that team is good enough that they will not be drafting high enough to get a quarterback. So that's why I
Right.
think they have to be after a veteran and not a free agent. A guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, a guy like Kirk Cousins that I'm gonna throw out there that could potentially be moved that people weren't talking about. A guy like Derek Carr, if he's moved, those guys are fits for what the Colts need to do in order to get over that hump because they're a playoff team. There's no reason they shouldn't have made the playoffs last year. When you have the best running back in
Yeah.
the NFL and Jonathan Taylor, you have a top 5 defense, top 10 defense, whatever the case may be, and you have good weapons. T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman, you have Ali Cox at tight end. You have
Alongside
good enough,
coaching.
exactly. Alongside the good coaching, the best situation is to go after Jimmy Garoppolo. It all just points to Jimmy Garoppolo being a Colt. It's just a matter of when, not a matter of where he's going. It's a matter of when he's traded to the Colts. That's where I'm at this point. It's just a matter of when he's traded to the Colts. Now,
Mm.
the draft capital that's going to be sent.
Yeah.
Everyone's thinking Jimmy Garoppolo won't be traded for a fifth or a bag of chips. It's very laughable. It's very no, I should just say laughable because there is a situation where he gets traded for a fourth rounder or whatever the case may be,
Right.
depending on situations. I think Jimmy Garoppolo ends up getting a second rounder back for the 49ers. Wherever he goes,
Yeah.
I believe he will at least, at minimum, return a second round draft pick for the 49ers. Um, Reason is because what the 49ers could end up doing is a lot of people might not realize how many third round draft picks the 49ers have next year. It would be a second round. If I'm the 49ers, what I'm telling the Colts is give me your second rounder at 42 you just got from the Commanders this year. Now, what ends up happening is the Colts would have it starting with at the third round, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. So what I would do, give me your second rounder and a third rounder next, and we'll swap third rounders next year.
Yeah.
So then what you end up doing is you get that second rounder, you swap thirds, and then if I'm the 49ers, I'll throw in a sixth or seventh rounder just to even it out, just to get your second round pick. Because this is a draft, and I think a lot of people want the 49ers to go corner at 61. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is the draft the 49ers need to capitalize on, or free agency they need to capitalize on and take advantage of Trey Lance's contract. So the time is now for the 49ers because you
Exactly.
unload $25
Exactly.
million with Jimmy Garoppolo. So the time is now. It's not next year, not the following. You have to go all in now for the next couple of years. So I think that's why they end up taking a second, but also giving a third. Fuck, if you have to give a third next year with so many draft picks you have, why not give a third rounder next year? If that means you get a second rounder this year and throw in a fifth this year to get a fourth next year. So you could get creative in a
Mhm.
lot of things you do because if you get a second rounder for Jimmy, the rest is just sweeteners. It's deal sweeteners just to clear a cap off your record. So I think that's
Yeah.
a good thing the Niners could do.
And when we talk specifically Garoppolo to the Colts, one sticking point, right? You bring up pick 42. However, the Colts might not be as inclined to trade that second round pick in a class where that's kind of like the bread and butter, and that somewhere second, third round range, they might not be inclined to trade that pick, especially if they're going all in this season. And that's why I think sticking points might not be towards 42, but the 49ers may look and say, okay, hey, if you're not trading us a second rounder this year, which is a fairly high second round pick, let's go to next year's picks. And the Colts may be more inclined to trade a one next year than a two this year, just because they want to compete this year. And the 49ers might try and push, say, instead of giving us a second and a fourth or second and whatever it is, maybe give us that one next year because the Colts, like you said, are going to be in the 20s next year. If they have Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, they're going to be at the 20s and they could potentially even win the division because the thing that was lacking for them this season against the Tennessee Titans was a lack of quarterback play. And I mean, they had a strong running back, they had a strong defense, strong offensive line. And so maybe more consistent quarterback. And it's not even like it's pushing the needle that much, but just a little bit more consistent quarterback with Jimmy Garoppolo, and who can actually be susceptible to coaching, and who, in my opinion, is a much better scheme fit because of his propensity to throw short rather than go deep to short like Carson Wentz likes to do. I think that honestly, Jimmy Garoppolo would just be a better fit, and it wouldn't be as bad for the Colts to trade a second next year, because I think a first next year, because if you're trying to trade a second next year, the 49ers might want more value, given that that second is likely going to be worse than the second that you get this year. And in addition, it's a next year pick, not a this year pick. So that's just the thinking point. I don't necessarily know if Garoppolo is going to go for a first, or if he's going for like a second is my expectation. But I could definitely see the thinking point behind San Francisco maybe pushing for a first if it's next year's first, especially because the Colts are likely going to have 2 second-round picks next year.
And what the 49ers could do, like if they end up, for example, and this is hypothetical, this isn't saying, we're not saying this is what the trade value or this is what he's going to go for, because a lot of people will start mixing up words and putting
Yeah,
stuff in our mouths, right? So I want to clear that right away, because I'm not trying to be
yeah,
on Twitter, someone clip us on Twitter, and next thing you know, everyone's coming for us, right? What we're saying is Jimmy Garoppolo has higher command trade wise than people actually think, draft
hmm
capital wise. And if the 49ers did say, hey, Colts, give us your first next year, but give us your fifth this year, and we'll give you a third. We'll give you Jimmy and a third next year. Now, that is enticing because you have 3 third-round picks next year. So you end up having 2, but you pick up a first and you pick up a fifth or fourth this year. So that is stuff that you could do. You could work out. At the end of the day, it's all just sweeteners when you start trading. Okay, I'll give you a fifth this year, but next year you have to give me a third if I give you that one. It's just deal sweeteners, stuff that could happen, right? But going
hmm
into free agency, the biggest reason the 49ers need to get Jimmy Garoppolo off their books, they need to look at Trey Lance, the future with Trey Lance, and bring in a free agent. Will the 49ers pursue a big name free agent in free agency this year?
No, I don't think they will, and here's why. A lot of people, myself included, have been looking at the idea of a Chandler Jones or a J.C. Jackson. I was more intrigued by the idea of adding Chandler Jones opposite of Nick Bosa, especially after the Khalil Mack news. So I started looking into the endless possibilities of potentially involving Chandler Jones on this 49ers team, looking at cap and looking at his potential suitors. Because guess what? Earlier this week, Chandler Jones went on the NFL Players podcast and he said, my number one priority is scheme fit and which team can maximize my talents. And that screams 49ers when you talk about the defensive line. We've had guys like Samson Ebukam, Arden Key, Jordan Willis, Charles Omenihu, you can name after name, Kerry Hyder Jr., who have flourished in the system because of how the defensive line coaches, Chris Kosterick, and also defensive coordinator D'Amico Ryan schemes these guys to get them freed up in the pass rushing game. And obviously, when you have a guy of Chandler Jones's caliber, yeah, of course he's going to flourish. But when you look at it, it's just unrealistic, because my price for Chandler Jones, if the 49ers were to sign him, was around a 2 to 3 year deal worth 13 to 16 million annually. I'd prefer a 2-year deal, but even at the cap, 16 million annually. Aaron Wilson did also report that Chandler Jones is looking like he's going to seek at least 15 to 18 on the open market. And there are a good amount of suitors. The Bills, the Broncos, the Dolphins, and I forget the other team, but there were 4 legitimate suitors, and all 4 of those teams could potentially view themselves as playoff contenders next year, especially the Bills and the Broncos, who seem to be showing interest in Chandler Jones. And so when you look at it, Jones might prioritize valuing both money and scheme fit, because he probably fits well in both of those teams. He's also going to get more money there. So I don't think it's realistic enough for the 49ers to engage in a bidding war. When we look at the other guy that people are talking about, that's J.C. Jackson. He's going to be too expensive, and he's also at a position the 49ers don't necessarily prioritize. It's the dream, but it's not going to happen. Now, am I going to be mad if either of those players end up 49ers? Hell no. Excuse me. Those are amazing talents. Please bring them on the team. But when we talk about big name free agents, the biggest name that I could see the 49ers pursuing is potentially Hassan Reddick, who probably also is going to be too expensive for the 49ers, or Stephon Gilmore if he takes an incentive-laden deal and or like a cheaper kind of deal to come to San Francisco. What about you?
So I think the 49ers don't sign a big name free agent. Um, Like they're not gonna go sign. Like they're gonna be in the market for these guys like J.C. Jackson. They're gonna be. We're gonna hear their name around these guys.
Yeah.
J.C. Jackson, the number one name they're gonna be around. You're gonna hear their name around the top guards because Lincoln Thomason might be walking, so you might hear their name around another guard like Brandon Scherf, or you might hear their name around a corner, a safety. But I think they're going to swing and miss on Chandler Jones. I think they're going to swing and miss on J.C. Jackson. J.C. Jackson, I think he's going to be a Charger. That's exactly where I think he ends up with the
Charger
Chargers,
or
which
Raider?
makes their defense. I think 100% Chargers. I think when the Chargers go and they pay him and they put him next with they put him in that on that defensive backfield with Derwin James and they have that defensive line that they've created. It's a very dangerous team there.
Mhm.
So I think they're not going to sign the big name guys that 49er fans want. I think they're not going to sign Stephon Gilmore, who a lot of 49er fans want. But there are some corners in this free agency class that are available. You have guys
Yeah.
like Isaiah Oliver who could compete. You have guys compete for positions. You have guys like Mike Hughes,
Yeah.
Carlton Davis, who won't command what the other guys
He'll
are
command
gonna
a
are
bit,
gonna
though.
pay.
He might
But
command a bit.
he's gonna
Yeah.
command about 16, 17, or
Yeah.
maybe even 20 in that range. But he's not gonna command what JC Jackson's commanding. You also have guys like Charvarius Ward, who I said on Twitter Spaces, who I think the 49ers might be very into.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think they could
their
also
corner is definitely one of the deeper free agent classes, right? Because there are a good amount of like I know the 49ers are going to have problems with slot cornerbacks, right? The 49ers definitely are going to have problems with slot cornerbacks right now, because K1 Williams is a free agent. But guess what? There's so many slot corners right now that are available. You got Bryce Callahan, you got Dante Jackson, was inside outside versatility. And I can go on and on. There's Desmond King, who would be a great fit for the 49ers. There are so many solid players at the cornerback position where you don't necessarily need a splurge because, like you said, NFL is a game of supply and demand. Right now, there's an insanely high supply, which means demand likely it doesn't necessarily decrease for the top options, but it likely decreases for the mid-tier options, which is where San Francisco likely targets. And so I think they're going to be able to get value signings to increase depth in that cornerback room because Jason Verrett's likely back. They're going to increase depth in that room via veterans, probably draft one other guy too. But it looks like with the veterans, they're probably going to get some bargain signings in free agency.
And I think like a guy that the 49ers could be after who is a name that most fans won't be like, oh, I love the signing. But I think it would be a great signing. A guy like Steven Nelson, who is a very veteran
Yeah.
presence, who he played with the Steelers, he's played with the Eagles. He just has very good starting caliber numbers, who I thought the 49ers should have signed last year. He ended up signing with the
Mhm.
Eagles like at $3 million, which was ridiculous because he
Yeah,
played
that's
very
cheap.
well with the Steelers. Another
And
guy,
he's only
DJ
29. He's
Reed.
only 29.
Yeah, he's a younger guy. So DJ Reed, who
That boy been tweeting. That boy been
he keeps putting
tweeting.
all these tweets, and I have to start like Morse code kind of thing where I'm starting to have to dissect these tweets. But he keeps saying, time heals all things, and life comes a full circle. DJ Reed might end up back in red and gold, realistically, because the 49ers didn't draft him to be a corner. They didn't draft him to be that elite shutdown corner. They drafted him to be a safety. They drafted him, they converted him to safety, and they started playing him back at corner. 49ers are at need of a safety, a slot corner, a guy who can do it all, be in a star role. That's what DJ Reed is. Realistically, DJ Reed could play outside, he could play inside, he could play strong safety. He is a defensive back through and through. I think that would be a great signing, even though it would be like, geez, we could have still had him. We would have just had to extend him. But I think that would be a great signing to go DJ Reed. I don't think they're going to get those big name guys. You might see them go after a guard, and if they go after a guard, if Laken Tomlinson walks, which I think he will, based on the market, he's going to get paid, even though there's a lot of good players out there. You got Brandon Scherf, Andrew Norwell. You have Roger Saffold, who just became available. Laken Tomlinson. So there is some guards out there that are a little bit better than him. But you have guards out there like what's his name? I have his name on the top of my head.
James Daniels.
James
James.
Daniels. I think you know me. I tweeted about him the other day.
Chicago, come
James
on.
Daniels.
Let's bring him in. Let's bring him in. Because
So
he is undervalued. He's young. Let's bring him in.
you have him. He has the position versatility to play center if needed.
Yeah.
You also have, I know a lot of fans won't like it because he has a lot of holding calls, but I think if you put him with the 49ers,
Connor Williams.
you put him with a better offensive line. Who are you going to say?
Connor Williams?
You said it. Yeah. Connor Williams. I think that's a guy is an option. I'm just throwing names out there that if Laken Tomlinson walks, you have to find a starting guard. You cannot rely on on two young players. A lot of people say put Aaron Banks. A lot of people say Aaron Banks and the young left Jalen Moore, the young left tackle they just drafted last year. That is an option. The 49ers drafted for the future last year. They didn't draft for last year's season. So that is something they could do if they decide to let Laken Tomlinson walk. I think they swung big on that trade. They won that trade with the Detroit Lions. There's a lot of good guards out there. I do like Trey Turner, which not the best guard, but it's you could plug
he's a starting kind of guy. But
caliber
the thing
kind of
is,
guy.
a lot of these guards, right? Recently, we've seen a solid amount of them get cut. We saw Roger Saffold get cut. We saw Trey Turner get cut, or sorry, not Trey Turner. John Feliciano get cut. And the thing is, when these guys are getting cut, they're likely looking to get less money than whatever they're being paid. It kind of means they're either overvalued or the team just doesn't value them as much because they're trying to get under the salary cap. So a guy like John Feliciano, who's just 30 years old, made about $5 million last year. You sign him on a 1-year, $4 million deal, reclamation type of project, even though he's a very solid guard already. Just sign him back, have him play left guard, and let him splurge when the TV deal hits next year and salary cap implodes. That type of deal is also a very solid guy and, a veteran. But the point being a lot of options for the 49ers to get, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to pursue a big-name free agent. But one other thing that I'm
going to throw out there. Before you go, because we're talking guards. The big name free agent I'm going to throw out there. And I'm going to stick to it. If the 49ers miss on Laken Tomlinson, the guy they're going to sign from the Los Angeles Rams, Austin Corbett. That's who they should go after. They're the two guards that I think they should go after. James Daniels and Austin Corbett. If you lose Laken Tomlinson, if you bring one of those guys in, we're fine. You could have Aaron Banks at the other side. You could have Jalen Moore at the other side. You just have to have one starting caliber guard if you're going to go a young player, because you could put Laken Tomlinson or Aaron Banks back at left guard next to Trent Williams, which would help him because of the superior left tackle. But I think they should be after one of those two guys who are going to be cheaper than Laken Tomlinson, but they're also a lot younger. Laken Tomlinson's 30, Austin Corbert's 26, about to be 27. And then James Daniels, I believe, going to be 25. So those are the two names that if they do sign big names, those are two big name guys I could see them signing.
Definitely. And, I mean, another position that the 49ers could look to, I don't necessarily think address to upgrade, but there's a lot of receiver talk been going on. We just saw Amari Cooper be traded for a 5th-round pick. Jarvis Landry is on the block. He could get cut as well. Should the 49ers go after a wide receiver in free agency, especially if some more of these guys, these veterans, maybe even a Cole Beasley, looks to get cut prior to the start of the new league year? What are your thoughts?
So my thoughts are yes. And I'm going to throw a name out there that it's going to get fans. I think if I was to post this on Twitter, it would get fans talking. Will Fuller.
Okay.
Hear me out.
Go for it. I like that.
Will Fuller got a 1-year, $10 million deal last year. He played 2 games because of injuries. So he's going to be on a low contract. He's on a prove-it contract. You'll get probably about a year, $5 million, a year, $6 million. So it's going to be a reasonable contract that the 49ers could afford, right? It's a luxury signing. But the 49ers need a deep threat. And if they could get Will Fuller to be healthy, if they could get Will Fuller's health right, they get an explosive receiver who everyone thought he was going to be better than what he has been. He hasn't lived up to his expectations. He was in Houston. He did play well with Deshaun Watson. But he was on his rookie year deal. They didn't extend him. He ended up going on a 1-year, $10 million deal. And the reason why he signed a 1-year, $10 million deal was because of injury concerns. No one really wanted to
Right.
sign someone who's been injured. So
Mhm.
if they could 49ers get Will Fuller at 1 year, $5 million deal, or I would say 5 to 7. That's reasonable for a receiver of his caliber, even though they have injury concerns. I would 100% be on board to go sign Will Fuller, get your deep threat for Trey Lance. And while you do that, you give the 49ers the opportunity in the draft. You don't have to prioritize receiver in the draft. If that makes sense. Because a lot of people want the 49ers to take, this is a deep receiver class, which I think they should take at least one or two. But you don't have to prioritize your receiving group in the draft. So I think you could take one later. If they do end up taking a receiver in the draft, a few names we could talk about later. But that's definitely a receiver I think they should go after. So yes, they should go after a receiver in free agency, but not the high end receivers that some will talk about. It's going to be more like the receivers who have the potential to be there, but they have either injury concerns or they didn't perform to their expectations. So that'd be a guy I would definitely go after. Any guys you looking at?
I'm looking at a couple, but the guys that I'm kind of looking at when I talk about receiver are Kyle Shanahan. The one thing he kind of covets, especially with special teamers, is the ability to play special teams and a prime position. There's a reason they let go of Ensemble Webster last year in favor of some other guys like Travis Benjamin, because Benjamin had the ability to play receiver and he was a returner. So I'm looking at those type of guys. Some guys that quickly pop off to me that are just under the radar. Jakeem Grant, he played in Chicago the last year. He can be a solid returner. He's a speedster as well. And, playing him in a versatile type of role where he can utilize that small frame but good speed of his, that might be beneficial in a Kyle Shanahan offense. You sign him on a 1-year deal. That's a solid option there. There are a couple of guys. I mean, another guy could be reunion with Marquise Goodwin, who also played for Chicago last year, if you want a burner. But I do agree that this team, the one thing that it could look to upgrade at the receiver position is just a burner. You don't necessarily need him to be an every down guy. It could look to get him in the draft. I mean, there are a good amount of burners in this class. It's one of the fastest wide receiver classes of ever. So you could definitely look to get that in the draft. But in free agency, if you're looking for those guys, yeah, there are a couple of guys where they have the versatility to both play special teams and a skill position spot. Another guy who not necessarily plays receiver, cornerback, I said earlier, Desmond King. He's got that ability too. But if we're talking receivers, yeah, smaller guys, Jakeem Grant, Marquise Goodwin, potentially. One name that was flirted around, or two really, were I wanted to get your thoughts. Christian Kirk and Juju Smith-Schuster. Those were two names on Twitter flirted around the 49ers this season. They're going to be expensive, or not season, but week, but they're going to be expensive. What are your thoughts on either of those receivers?
I would say I pass on both receivers, and I would rather have like a guy like James Washington, who just never was utilized. But when he did get the opportunity, he showed that he could be a decent receiver in the NFL. He showed he could be a receiver 3 when he had to be a receiver 3. So I would rather go after a guy like that. You're not going to have to pay him as much as a guy like Christian Kirk, who should command a little bit more than what people
Right.
think, because he has produced good numbers. So he should get 10 plus, because it is a not so deep of a receiver free agency class. And the reason it was deep until everyone got tagged or everyone got signed or traded
Right.
away, like Amari Cooper was supposed to be on the free agent market. So I would go
Yeah, we
after
were
a guy
supposed to
like
have
James.
Cooper, Godwin. Yeah, but go ahead.
So I would rather go after a guy like James Washington or Will Fuller, who are going to be cheaper contracts because they haven't produced, or because of the lack of opportunity, I should say, for James Washington, and the lack of staying healthy for Will Fuller. You can also look at guys like you mentioned, a guy like Jakeem Grant. The 49ers have been connected to Ray
Ray
uh,
McLeod, yeah, from Pittsburgh.
McLeod from Pittsburgh. So that's another a guy you could connect to the 49ers. I don't know if everyone remembers Keelan Cole. He's
Ooh, Jacksonville.
with Jacksonville. He should be able to get him reasonably at a reasonable price. He can return kicks. He can return punts. Now with Keelan
Yeah.
Cole, He has the ability. He's shown that he could produce in the NFL. That one year he went crazy. It wasn't a fluke because look who he played with that quarterback. So that's what kind of sucks. He shouldn't get the bag. He was with the New York Jets last year, so he shouldn't get paid. Albeit last year he was on like a $5 million contract roughly. He's 28, so he's not too old. He's had 500 yards. I know last year, I want to say he had about 500 yards with Jacksonville or the Jets. The year before, he had about 800 with Jacksonville. So three receivers I would personally go after were James Washington, Keelan Cole, and Will Fuller. Those are three receivers I would definitely go after because I think they provide that deep threat that the 49ers need. But also Ray McLeod provides the gadget stuff that Kyle Shanahan likes to do, as long as with the punt returning. And don't get me wrong, Keelan Cole and James Washington could both return punts. They could both return kicks. So that's something that we have to also factor in, because the receiver 3 most likely is going to be Jawan Jennings next year going into the training camp. So you have to bring someone in to compete for that receiver 3 spot. So someone who's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, but someone you can get at a reasonable price that could also do the punt returning and kick returning duties.
Don't disagree at all there. And I mean, with a guy like Juju or a guy like Christian Kirk, both probably going to command somewhat a fairly high salary at the receiver position, given the lack of top end talent necessarily. There's more depth than top end talent. So it won't necessarily be the smartest decision for the 49ers to go out and get another receiver when they already have a flurry of offensive weapons and also are more of a run dominant team. So don't disagree with you there. But all of this leads up to one place, and that's the NFL draft, where regardless of where Jimmy Garoppolo goes, right now the 49ers pick at 61. What is the position you think you target there to end this off?
At 61, I'm going, if I had to target a position of the draft, I would go defensive end. And the reason why I go edge rusher is because we need someone opposite of Nick Bosa. But at that range, 61, you're gonna get the best value for a position at edge. I don't think so. We look at receiver. You can find a receiver later in the draft in the 4th, 5th round. You can find a corner in the 3rd. The 49ers aren't in desperate need of a corner after the emergence of Ambry Thomas. And I think the 49ers agree with that. I think they're going to roll with Ambry and Emmanuel Moseley. So you need someone else to get to the quarterback. So I would definitely say edge rusher. If they could land Myjai Sanders, I already said I'm going to be super ecstatic. I probably won't stop talking about it because that is my draft crush. I really think Myjai Sanders is going to be a stud in the league. Everyone keeps talking about his weight, keeps talking about this and that. He stepped on the scale the other day at a doctor, I think got a medical checkup or whatever, and he was 247. A lot of people don't realize that going into it was reported that going into the combine, he was dealing with a sickness. He was dealing with an illness that made him lose a lot of weight. And during the draft, he couldn't hold any food. They're not draft, the combine. He couldn't hold any food down, any liquids down. He met with the doctors to see how he could get through the combine, and he still put up good numbers. Even though he was at 227, 230, whatever he weighed in at, he was very light. Gotta realize when you're not able to eat, you're not able to get fluids in your system, and you still perform like you did. You were super tired, your body isn't what it's supposed to be. Those are good numbers. I expect he'll do better at his pro day. So that is a guy that I'm 100% on. Myjai Sanders. If the 49ers can get another edge rusher at 61, they've met with a lot of them. That's where they should go. I wouldn't mind if they ended up going tight end, if a guy like Trey McBride is there, or there's another tight end off the top of my head. I cannot think of his name. Jesus Christ. I'm about to go back to my
Isaiah
notes.
Likely?
Isaiah Likely.
Yeah.
Isaiah Likely. I was gonna call his last name something else. I was gonna call it Likely, and I knew it wasn't Likely. So I would rather go Isaiah Likely and Trey McBride if they go something else. Give Trey Lance another weapon on offense, or even receiver. A guy like Sky Moore, if he's there at 61. There's a lot of options, but in my opinion, for the pick of where it's at, the most value they will get from that pick is if they go edge rusher. So I think that's the best opportunity for the 49ers to capitalize on, since they're not picking high in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I think we've been synonymous with this, where we've thought BPA kind of is the right way to go at 61, especially with the team that the 49ers currently have, where they have solid players at most of their positions. So yeah, BPA and edge right now is one of the deeper parts of this class. Obviously, edge is one of the highest priorities of any NFL team, especially when you have a team like the 49ers who are predicated on getting the quarterback as the main focus on their defense. So edge, certainly, that's a position to look at. If a guy like Myjai Sanders, if a guy like Arnold Ebiketie, somebody, there's going to be someone that falls. And whoever that is, if 49ers get him at 61, I wouldn't be mad. Another guy, obviously, another position, that we could look for is safety. That's kind of the one that's been floating around. I do think that there would be talent in the third round at safety if you wanted to address the position there, which is why I thought edge would also be good at 61. Receiver, I think that it's more of a luxury, and I think it's better to target in terms of value. It's better to target in the fourth and fifth round because, like I said earlier, there's a lot of burners in this class. You're going to have burners in that later round, and that's kind of where the 49ers just want to improve on offense if you're talking receiver. And then running back, obviously, I think the 49ers definitely could draft a running back, but that's also likely to happen in the later rounds. I don't think it happens in the second round, especially with this running back class. But there's so many positions of depth. You probably go BPA. And if that happens to be edge, which it definitely could be, I would not mind edge at 61 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with edge, you can never have too many good pass rushers on your team.
Right.
Injuries happen at the defensive line position, so I think edge is the best position to go after. Even though you've been going defensive line, edge rusher, defensive line, edge, like they've been going that or offensive line, defensive line, like for the last couple of years. If you build your trenches, you allow your weapons and your the rest of your team to go to work. So I think that's what they should do is go edge. But I wouldn't mind if they went receiver, go get a true number 3 because it allows you to do other stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about at at the 49ers position, right? So if the 49ers, what I mean by position is they have to pay Deebo Samuel. And I'm not saying trade Deebo Samuel, but I'm saying if the 49ers were to get a guy like Sky Moore at 61, who he reminds me of Steve Smith.
Mhm.
That's who he reminds me of his play style. So if they were to go after a guy like that, or a guy like if George Pickens falls to 61, which I don't think he should, but you get Trey Lance another weapon. But now you could either tag Debo next year or extend Debo next year and have Debo show you that he could do what he did this year 2 years in a row. Because if we look at what Debo's done, he's only done this 1 year. Realistically, he's only done the elite level of receiving play for 1 year. His rookie year was good, great rookie year, but it wasn't
Mhm.
elite. Remember, like if we look at rookie years, it wasn't Jamar Chase rookie year. It wasn't a Justin Jefferson rookie year. Yeah, it's with Jimmy Garoppolo, but if you look at it, if I'm gonna pay a guy $22 million to $25 million,
Right.
show me you can do it for one more year, and I'll pay you, even if I have to bite the bullet and I have to pay him a little bit more than what I would have if I extended him early. Show me you can do it for one more year. And if
Yeah,
and if he
it's a
and if
fair
they
argument.
can't, and if he can't, then you could tag and trade him. I'm not saying that, and again, I'm not saying the 49ers should trade, but I'm saying allow Debo Samuel to show you he could do his elite level of play for one more year before you extend him. So if you do go at 61, if you fall in love with the receiver at 61, you could take receiver at 61 because you could eventually turn Debo into a first rounder the following year or whatever the case may be. I think they should extend him, but I don't think it should be this year. I want to see one more year from it before I commit all that money. So there's a lot of ways they could go at 61. They could go receiver, but what I would do if I was the 49ers would be edge rusher.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, I agree with the edge rusher thing. I do have a little bit of a differing opinion on Debo Samuel. I do think that the 49ers, if they were to ever extend him, should be this offseason. I think that if you let him play one more year, they aren't going to extend him just because the cost will be too much next season. But that topic's for another time. Great episode. And guys, Next time we talk free agency and a Jimmy Garoppolo trade likely happens, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're going to be updating you guys, and trust me, there will be news going for the next couple of days regarding not only Jimmy Garoppolo but the 49ers and their free agency plans. We're tuned. Stay tuned for all the information.
Yeah, we'll definitely be, as soon as that Jimmy G trade goes down, we'll definitely be jumping on and as soon as we can, whether that be that day or the following day, but it should be that day. But don't forget to make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. Down low, you could find our 49ers Red Zone podcast on YouTube. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Make sure you give us a thumbs up, a review on Apple Podcasts, a review on Spotify. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Saturday.